Welcome to Darker Days Radio presents Darkhammer, a Worlds of Warhammer podcast. I'm one of your regular hosts, Chris, and I'm joined once again by Mike. Hi, Mike. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. I'm definitely ready to talk about chaos once again.
Oh, yeah, it's been a while. We've had quite the hiatus. We've all been busy. It's been Christmas. It's been everything. So, yeah, we're just going to get back into it. This is another episode about Chaos Gods, which is great. That means we're nearing the end, as it were, and then we'll get into some other Warhammer specifics for other episodes because there's a lot more stuff out recently. But before, so yeah, we're going to talk about Tzeentch. But before we get into that, let's talk about some gaming updates. So, Mike, what have you been up to, kind of gaming wise, Warhammer related?
Warhammer related? Nothing.
Have you been painting
no-
anything or any cool
nothing
stuff?
for Warhammer. Nothing for Warhammer. But I'll tell you something cool that did happen. My friend was walking down the street and checked out a little free library and found some old copies of How to Paint Citadel Miniatures and How to Paint Space Marines. Which,
Oh wow!
she said, "Oh, Mike might want that," and now I've got them. And going through that old like 2003 classic How to Paint Citadel Miniatures is pretty great. It's actually really interesting to see that they gave you tips on how to make your own basically contrast paints and washes back in the day before those were even part of the range. Just using inks and other mixtures. Actually, inks and PVA glue was a pretty popular thing that they did, which I found a little questionable, but it worked back then and could still work today. But the Space Marines book actually kind of garbage, to be honest. It's mostly, it doesn't actually really tell you how to paint that much. It's just kind of the stuff you'd find in the rule book where it's like, or in a White Dwarf where it's like, here, just like layer up some paint. And then a whole lot of like galleries on different Space Marine chapters and different things that people in the design studio or the Nottingham staff had painted up themselves, which is pretty cool. But I was expecting a little bit more in there with regards to actually painting Space Marines.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Gaming wise, for me, let's say played a game of Warcry 2.0.
Cool.
Yeah, it's not really that much different to the first edition of it. So reactions don't turn up that frequently. You don't really have to use them. They're very edge case, kind of like when situational. So I think things are just better balanced. Like Iron Golems now are pretty decent. I think
They
they've
weren't
got
good
more.
before?
Yeah, they've got more hit points.
Okay.
So they just feel tougher. So that's quite good. Bear with me. Let's think. What else? Darktide has been a lot of fun to play. I need to play through a bit more of that, but it captures a lot of Warhammer 40,000 as a as Imperial Guardsmen or agents of the Inquisition, and exploring the Underhive. So I need to dive into that and see what new environments and missions they've put in recently.
Yeah. Do you want to do an episode on that sometime? It seems like you're
Oh
really
yeah, we
excited
need to
about it.
cover it. There's a lot of lore about the Hive Tertium. That's the hive you're on, and Atoma Prime, which is the world. There's a whole subsector of planets which you can pick who you can, as you make your character, you can pick to be from some of these planets. So that adds a bit of character. So that's really good fun. Let's think what else. I bought and played Blood, Teeth, and Shooters, which is a platform shooter where you're playing as orcs and as a orc. It's got very cartoony graphics and it's got a really cool soundtrack. So it's just good stupid fun. You get to kill orcs, Genestealer cultists, Imperial Guardsmen, Space Marines. It's got everything. And then
It looks good. Definitely a nostalgia trip.
Oh yeah,
and definitely in the same vein as that kind of Doom clone shooter that they were teasing a little while back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good fun.
And then I've finally played some more like a proper full game of Aeronautica Imperialis. That was good fun, using the rules a bit more. I mean, it's not a very deep, it's not a very complicated game. There's lots and lots of rules, but it's very deep because of the tactical maneuvering. So, yeah, Eldaria just pain in the ass. They're really tricksy. So I've got like a few new models to paint for the Space Marines. So I've got the Fire Raptors because they've got some more close range weaponry, which should be good against the Eldar, and an old resin vampire hunter. So that was for the original version of Aeronautica Imperialis. So technically, it's only a model that is 6mm in scale, but you can't really tell from what I can see. So it still looks appropriate. I just need to paint it. That's basically it. So that's gaming recently for me.
Yeah, actually, I just remembered something, Chris, that is Warhammer adjacent, which I've been kind of checking out and interacting with, and that's the this fellow Napoleonic Wargaming on YouTube is actually making his conversion for Mezbeg, Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game, to Napoleonics, which I think is pretty cool, pretty interesting. Just have like kind of a nice, easy, free-flowing skirmish system for what is normally a massed battle game that takes you 5 days to complete one battle. So
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. Not exactly Warhammer, but definitely something neat that people should check out in the near future.
Cool. Right. I guess we talk about gaming news because there's like lots recently, like lots. It's been a while for us to talk about. So
yeah,
let's talk about all the releases. Right. So there's some Era of the Beast stuff for Age of Sigmar coming out, or is out. I can't quite remember. But the big thing for that is we've seen the cover for the Ulfenkarn book. So that is the Age of Sigmar Soulbound tie-in with Cursed City. So that should be really interesting. Like, that's a really cool location, even if the end game of the actual Warhammer Quest board game is quite crap, because like basically the narrative just goes off the rails.
Yeah, it's challenging to make a satisfying narrative with player agency for a board game, compared to a role playing game, which is why the Ulfenkarn source book for Soulbound is really exciting, and especially for those of us that have always kind of wished that there was a Mordheim sort of Warhammer Fantasy roleplay source book. This is kind of the next best thing. It's a city which is incredibly dangerous. Lots going on, lots of foul magic, undead, and everything else. And it really gives some similar feelings to Mordheim while not being the same sort of apocalyptic nature. So I'm ecstatic that we're going to be getting this soon, and definitely want to review that sometime and play it too.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Let's think. What else? I mean, we've seen plenty of stuff out for Age of Sigmar recently with new Slam models, more Slaves to Darkness coming out. There's plenty of things. Go over to Warhammer Community to look at that. We've got a new box coming out for Warcry. We've got these weird vampires versus a cornate kind of fleshhound cult. So that's again some really cool models and ties in with what we've been talking about in this kind of series of shows recently. Let's think what else. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I can't remember if there's been any book out recently. I think there has been, but I can't remember.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff coming out. They announced the Lustria source book, which is really exciting.
Yes.
And of course, I mean, I think, I'm not sure if this came out while we were recording the Chaos things, but the Enemy Within got wrapped up as well with the new ending. So that's definitely really rad.
The other big thing is, of course, with Warhammer is the Old World. We're getting more teasers of that. So that new edition of what we feel as Warhammer Fantasy Battles in its classic form is coming back. We're learning
Mhm.
more that it's about that period when it was the time of 3 emperors or more. So
Yep.
this all predates the coming of Magnus the Pious. So yeah, we're getting historical Warhammer, and again, that's great for the roleplay game because
Oh yeah.
the settings get developed, so that makes it a viable time to play. It means, wizards and magic users are distrusted, elves are distrusted, elves and dwarves don't get on, firearms are not commonplace. It's going to be a really good setting.
Definitely. And also what takes place at that time, more time as well. So I'm
Oh, yeah.
always going to be thrilled for it.
Then we also have, as I said, with Curse City, actually going back to Age of Sigmar, all the expansions are out for that. So I've got all of those. I just need to get all the relevant miniatures. I've got a few things to get for it and to paint if I ever get time, and complete the first campaign. So that's something. I'm just going through the Cubicle 7 news of Warhammer. I'm sure they released something else, but I think they've really focused on 40k and Age of Sigmar right now with Warhammer. I think when you wrap up the Enemy Within campaign, it gives them a nice fresh start with new ideas, really.
Mhm.
So Wrath and Glory, we see the cover for Threat Assessment Xenos, which I wrote for. So there's Jesus Occults, Eldari Craftworld, Eldari Harlequins, Eldari Drakari, Tau, and Necrons and Orcs. So it's a big bestiary book of all those things, plus some other rules. So that's been long awaited. So that's closer to production. Then we also have teased from that update is there's going to be a threat assessment kind of chaos book. So, that's going to be what?
Sweet.
Cultists, space marines, monsters, demons, the whole, the works. So that's going to be great. There's other books for Wrath and Glory still in the process that have been announced, like the Eldari kind of player character book to come out. And then
Cool.
40k wise, like on the miniature side, we've got the whole Arcs of Omen and boarding actions, which is a new way of playing. A lot smaller armies with the cool, Space Hulk kind of terrain. And the new box for Kill Team, which has Adeptus Arbites and Drakari, I think is a must buy for me personally. I need to get that box because Adeptus Arbites, like we haven't seen in years. So that update and learning how they operate in the universe is going to be really interesting.
Oh yeah, because we just had the enforcers for Necromunda. It wasn't actually the
Yes,
Adeptus Harbites. So
yeah.
wow. So when was the last time we had miniatures for them? Was it the old metal ones from the
Uh,
90s?
it would have been the metal ones they did for the second run of Necromunda in about
Yeah.
2002, 2003.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's been quite a while. All right, that
it's a
is really
while.
exciting. Nice.
And yeah, you're right because the enforcers are Necromunda's kind of police force. So the
Mhm.
Adeptus Arbites are really like the FBI for the Imperium. They work across, planets and work across subsectors and so forth.
Right. Right.
They're very federal rather than local.
Yeah, and they were kind of setting it up with the Shira Calpurnia Adeptus Arbites books that came out years ago. Yeah, that's really cool. And if people want to hear more about those, they can check out the Law in the Imperium episode that you did with David, I think.
That's right, and we'll mostly have to go back and update that information when we get the Kill Team
Yep.
box out. But I think that covers pretty much everything gaming wise out of Games Workshop right now. There's still more that we haven't mentioned, I'm sure, but there's a lot of cool stuff, and it's a pretty cool time to pick up some RPG supplements, really. Right, I guess we talk about Tzeentch.
Yep, let's do it. So, Chris, I can kick things off here a little bit
Yeah.
and
Cheers.
give you a break. So, let's talk about the origins of Tzeentch and the other Chaos gods. So, in Warhammer and Age of Sigmar, Chaos is a primeval force that was unleashed upon the old world when the Chaos Gates, uh, which were how the old ones traveled across the universe to the old world, uh, when they collapsed. When these gates collapsed, the force of chaos, the magic poured through. There's 4 different chaos gods primarily. Maybe we'll have a 5th episode, you never know, covering some other smaller entities that are out there. But Korn is, as we mentioned, an out of control desire to survive. And we have Nurgle, which is the fear of death, and then Tzeentch is a little bit in between. Living beings enact change and they evolve, and they want to shape the world around them as they see fit, and that is what Tzeentch kind of checks into with his own powers. But that desire to change the world in the case of Tzeentch is completely unchecked, which leads to more than just evolution, but also chaos and conspiracy that spirals out of control on the surface, and also leads to some very complex scheming. Tzeentch hates stagnation. Change is instigated through lies, deceit, ambition, destiny, prophecy, and sorcery, and things that generally break the natural cycles. Meanwhile, in 40K, Tzeentch was the second of the 4 ruinous powers to awaken, sometime around the start of the Middle Ages, when great nation states formed after the ruins of Rome, and these nations, of course, were a hot pot of scheming. So, what is Tzeentch about exactly? Amongst all of these chaos gods, what does he represent? And his aspects are really relevant to destiny, portents, prophecy, magic, and sorcery, things that can change the natural laws. Also, fire is really the element that he most corresponds to, and so do his demons as well. Uh, Tzeentch is following, as this kind of deific figure, following many different conspiracies and ambitions. Wheels within wheels, trying to reach for power and thus change anything that he can see. And so, same thing with his followers as well. Things like evolution and mutation amongst creatures and beings are things that can be done to strive for greater and more power. Um, Nothing really that Tzeentch deals with is clean, sensible, or ordered. Raw creation, power, and change. And as we'll see with like different locations associated with Tzeentch, even those are not static; they're ever changing. Um, and this really puts Tzeentch in opposition to stagnation and death. He does not like to see the end of things, the end of life, but instead looks for change and creation to oppose that, which really makes him the diametric opposite of Nurgle. Tzeentch also has some very positive aspects. We've been highlighting this with the different chaos gods, but I think it's really important to bring these up. So Tzeentch, of course, loves magic, sorcery, and knowledge, and the power that comes with it. And it is that drive that humans are attracted to, being able to become something greater that they are, to evolve not just themselves, but also their society and their world. And another less discussed aspect of Tzeentch is, of course, hope. Tzeentch, for many, especially the downtrodden, can represent a change for the better, ambition for a brighter future, and ultimately progress. But whether if that is for good or ill really kind of depends on the people and how Tzeentch feels that day, because he can be a bit fickle sometimes. As we mentioned, Nurgle is the diametric opposite of Tzeentch, who is very cautious, doesn't really like to adapt, and is static in many ways. Tzeentch, of course, refers for his creations to adapt, evolve, and mutate constantly and perhaps endlessly.
It'll be interesting, actually. The mutation of Tzeentch, what
Mhm.
they've struck on, is also I feel quite different to what Nurgle kind of, because Nurgle also has mutation as an aspect, but I feel Nurgle as a mutation is almost like life and decay unleashed, so they're kind of more natural progressions to a
Mm.
certain extent, whereas Tzeentch with the mutations are much more uh, bizarre in some respects. Maybe I think there could be. I think that's an interesting to compare those two things on how they change life.
Yeah. I think you hit on something right there. It's going to be very slow, methodical change for Nurgle. More evolution, and with Tzeentch, it's going to be, you know, work fast and break things.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll end up with something like very highly effective, very interesting, but other times, maybe that mutation won't work out for the best. Um, so yeah, Tzeentch is very interesting in that way. Another thing that we've been highlighting with some of these episodes is how different old world gods may actually be a very narrow aspect of the chaos gods. We explored different fertility deities that Nurgle is probably associated with, and of course, like Cain and Myrmidia being associated with corn. Tzeentch has some of these similar aspects with the old world gods, but actually far fewer than them. It was actually very difficult to um, find that many matchups. But I think I found two, which are pretty strong. First, amongst the Elven pantheon in the old world, there is, I'm going to mispronounce this, I think, but I think it's Lilith, who is the god of clarity, prophecy, and foresight, and also a god of dreams and fortune. And this moon goddess is associated with the more Nurgle-like Aisha and Moreheg, who are goddesses of fertility and death, respectively. But you kind of can see, sandwiched into this cycle of life, is this brief but powerful aspect, which is Lilith. Um, and the kind of prophecy and foresight, I think, is a very interesting connection to Tzeentch, since many times Tzeentch will kind of give prophetic powers to some of his followers. In addition to that, in the human pantheon of the old world, there's also Verena, which has many aspects of Tzeentch. This is a goddess of science, justice, and knowledge, and Verena oftentimes is a benevolent force for those seeking freedom from despotism. Um, Elves actually have a similar god named Hoth, but Hoth to me seems a lot more static than Tzeentch would be dynamic. So I'm not really sure if that's a good overlap right there. And Chris, I was also looking at Renaald, which is a kind of god of luck and thieves, and I just wasn't sure if that was a good matchup. You know,
That sounds pretty cool. I think
yeah,
thieves mostly works with tricksters, con
right,
artists.
right.
So that feels like a good match.
Okay, good. Yeah, certainly the fickle nature of Renaald uh, can match up very well, but I wasn't sure so much about the thievery. But you bring up a good point. So that's another good one as well. If you want to tie together the different old world gods to different chaos aspects.
The other thing I was going to say is that I think this ties in with the Enemy Within campaign, is that Tzeentch, I feel, is at its zenith in power in the Warhammer world, at least, when the Empire is perceivably at peace. So,
Mm,
there's no massive war going on, there's no plague. I think Tzeentch and more than likely Slanesh are, you know, working their most in that peacetime, because obviously within that peacetime, the Empire and other similar kingdoms around it of humans, they are able to form, conspiracies and plans for the future, and that mostly represents why Tzeentch feels like the main kind of orchestrator, as it were, of the Enemy Within campaign.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a great point about the peacetime being where Tzeentch can achieve the most power. We'll definitely see that when we talk about the Purple Hand down below. Um, yeah, I was also trying to figure out, when Fantasy Flight had Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the license, they released their own version of The Enemy Within, which did not have the Purple Hands, but had the Black Cowl, who was doing very similar things. I was trying to figure out if he was a servant of Tzeentch or not, and seems like he probably wasn't. But anyway, I'll research that, and maybe we can talk about that in a future episode. Maybe when we get to that mythic fifth Chaos God episode. So, Chris, do you want to talk about worshippers of Tzeentch a little bit?
Yeah. So as we've said, Tzeentch, is basically the patron of magic, sorcery, or in the 40k universe, also psychic powers, knowledge seekers, technologists, those type of people. So, and also as we've mentioned, is enjoys watching conspiracies and plans interweave, and those people thinking they're going to get power when really they are unwittingly serving Tzeentch. So ultimately, worshippers of Tzeentch are drawn more than likely unwittingly into that worship because they are seeking to gain power for their own benefit to break from destiny or fates laid out for them. So that's good on the one hand, but you have to be careful of what you are asking for, because each can quite happily reward even the most well-intentioned person unwittingly can be corrupted and turned into a spawn, or even some of Tzeentch's greatest champions are brought low and turned into mindless spawn because there is another willing, better potential servant waiting in the wings. So the worshippers of Tzeentch, I think, are always going to have at their heart an element of hubris, which is they think they know what they're going to get out of the deal, but ultimately, Tzeentch is fickle what happens.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And within that scope, I think many of the cults for Tzeentch, I think, are best represented as kind of mystery cults that will, and a mystery cult essentially means there are layers and layers of indoctrination for you to learn the truth, and those type of cults can work in every strata of society, and that's why Tzeentch can draw people into its influence, whether they are workers in some manufactorum on some godforsaken hive world, or be some well regarded imperial member of the imperial nobility or administratum at the higher levels of society, or within the mechanicum or similar things, because again, people may feel that they are they feel they are owed power, owed technology, knowledge, whatever.
Yep.
And when you've got groups like the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Administratum and so forth that are banning those things, you can feel kind of hurt by that, and so seek out power by other means. Also, Tzeentch most probably has a lot of fun with radicals, and especially heretical inquisitors within the Inquisition, and that likely also is true within similar organizations. The Inquisition of the Empire. So really, anyone from any part of society, often I feel mostly starting out with good intentions and seeing that they get rewarded. And I'm sure Tzeentch, through its agents, takes great joy in seeing how easily people are perverted from their good intentions to down darker paths. That's kind of how I would set things up, and I think the roleplay games, Warhammer Fantasy for certain, we already have evidence of it within the enemy within campaign. I'm sure we'll touch on this when the new 40k RPG comes out, the Imperium Maledictum, which is basically Warhammer Fantasy but with Imperial agents. So just humans, just agents. They can be radicals, or they may be working for radical and not knowing it. I think that is the kind of scope to explore these themes.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's interesting that you were bringing up, Chris, the idea of how Tzeentch and power might kind of pervert the good intentions of different worshippers of Tzeentch, or people that get kind of trapped within his web of intrigues. But a theory that's always kind of existed or been hinted at with Tzeentch is that, you know, if you were finally to win the great game against the other three chaos gods and, you know, seize power over them, basically be the final one standing, be the Highlander, uh his concepts of radical change and all of that might actually just go away. He'd make the ultimate change to become just a static despot in that case, which I always thought was a very interesting concept, because, you know, his own twisted, perverted good intentions would ultimately change at the very end to just bring oppression to the world.
I would also say that Tzeentch is his own. Tzeentch as a god, I say his, like all the chaos gods, gender has no
Mhm.
meaning. But I think Tzeentch is their own enemy as well, because winning the great game brings you to a state which is in its own right an imbalance. And so the only
Mm.
way for progress forward is for Tzeentch to fluctuate back to a state of where there's no power for Tzeentch and the others can rise up. So that flux always
Mm.
has to exist.
Mm. Ooh, you know, that is really interesting, actually. That could be a very fun concept for a game wherein one of Zinch's cults is told to go basically eliminate his other cults that are becoming
Yeah,
too powerful.
yeah.
Perfect.
Because they become too powerful and then they're because they've got that power, they know they've taken control. They're now too locked into what they wanted. And so the only way to keep the great game progressing is to eliminate them.
I like it. Good concept.
So we should talk about types of examples of cults that we've seen throughout the game. Then let's see.
Mhm.
Let's start with Age of Sigmar, because fortunately the Warcry game has showcased so many great chaos cults that don't don't wear on their sleeve their allegiance to a particular chaos god too
Mm.
strongly, but you can see the elements in there. So my personal favorite, and as well personal favorite within the game to play them, is the Cypher Lords. So they wear masks, which kind of fits in with that mystery cult kind of element. They come from the realm of light. So again, that's a realm where there's I guess, strives to be, everyone's striving for a higher ideal, for purity. And so to have this cult working in the background, almost quite openly, maybe, to cause confusion and dissent, that's a really cool concept, and I'm sure we'll see more of the Realm of Light in other expansions and books. More recently, we've had the Jade Obelisk in Warcry. They're from the Realm of Gur, and I think they're all slowly like changing into stone. And again, they kind of wear masks, or at least their faces appear as masks. They're being turned into jade.
Mm.
We don't know. I haven't got that. Uh, that stuff hasn't yet been sold separately out of the box game they did for that. So I'm waiting to get that individual book and that warband to see more about them. There's also the Rotmire Creed, which I think kind of border between Nurgle and Tzeentch, maybe. Mike?
Mm. I don't really know much about them. I actually feel like that might have been left in from our previous show notes, actually.
Oh, right. Well, I guess there's an element possibly there, because again,
Ooh.
they look like they are. I guess they could be very, on the edge of it, because they're former alchemists.
Ah,
So
right. Yeah.
there's that element there of knowledge and power. So I think that could be kind of fun to explore. But of
Mm.
course, there are our favourite arch bastards, aren't they? From the enemy within, which is the Purple Hand. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, I'm going to jump into them in just a second, but I
Okay.
actually want to bring something up really interesting, because it was good that we brought up the Rotmire Creed, and also, of course, Cypher Lord's Jade Obelisk, because Age of Sigmar is really really awesome with its chaos cults. They're very unique. They have a lot of character, a lot of flavor, and they're great to mine for ideas for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Because a common complaint about Wolf Rip is that uh, the chaos cults feel very samey. You know, corn cults don't have a lot of variety. Tzeentch cults, wheels within wheels. You know, Slanesh cults. It's either sex or drugs. You know, take your pick. Um, but when you look at these different cults that have been written up in Warcry, especially, it gives you a lot of really interesting, unique ideas. And you know that cult that we were talking about, or war bands for Warcry that we're talking about, that are based off of the Corn flesh hounds, could be a really interesting thing to bring in as like a secret society
Yeah.
within the Empire. For a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I just want to bring that up as like a really cool thing to kind of steal ideas and kind of mix and match between these different Warhammer settings.
Yeah, I just realised there's two more we can add in to this discussion, which I think are a good representations of chaos cults that kind of add that grab an element of things we associate with Tzeentch.
Hmm.
Scions of the Flame. Again, they
Oh,
are
yeah.
they are fire wielding chaos cult. So I would say they're somewhere between Tzeentch and Korn, but they're definitely grabbing that fire is a representation of chaos. And then the other one, which have a definite kind of, again, maybe they're Tzeentch and Korn, Tzeentch, Korn and Nurgle mix, is the Corvus Cabal,
Yeah.
because they have that bird effigy, kind of that bird kind of like symbology, which when we'll be talking about the demons of each, they have that in like a lot. So I think the
Absolutely.
Corvus Cabal grab that element, and then the death element is obviously coming from the fact that corvids being carrion eaters. Is that kind of a
Indeed.
representation of corn, or is that a representation of Nurgle? So I think that's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But let's get back to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and, of course, the Purple Hand Cult. They are the stars of the Enemy Within scenarios. People that checked out our actual plays of the first part of the Enemy Within, Shadows of Bogenhofen, will definitely recognize these guys from the very end. And this is a vast conspiratorial network within the Empire. Uh, who are plotting something dreadful for the old world nation. I don't really want to go into what they're doing because, could be some spoilers there. But rather than demons and magic, which they do have access to, they actually often resort to blackmail and extortion to get what they want, which I think is a very good point. That they could be using these uh, more eldritch tools at their disposal, but it's a lot safer and actually, honestly, probably a lot easier to just be doing these much more mundane things as well, which is how they can so insidiously spread their web throughout the empire.
We should also not forget, of course, because this is obviously been a feature of. I've not played it yet, so Total War Warhammer 3 is
Mhm.
introduces, like, for, I would say, properly for the first time to everyone, representations, and we'll mostly see these as miniatures with Old World, is Cathay. And of
Yep.
course, Cathay has Tzeentchian cults there because Tzeentch is known as, let me get this right, just trying to find it. It's in a wiki somewhere. um, it's something like, what would it be? I saw it, and I saw it. Qian Chi is the name of Tzeentch in the East. So,
Mm.
and again, I guess that thematically makes sense, because if you're going to crib real world society, culture, society, and if you think, most probably part of the Cathay kind of iconography and philosophy is Taoism, so balance, yin yang, right? That
Hmm.
is the polar opposite of Tzeentch. So that's again a way of possibly introducing characters into Warhammer Fantasy who come to the Empire following the routes of whatever he's called, it's not Marco, whatever the Warhammer World version of Marco Polo is.
Oh yeah,
But
there's an actual character. I forgot his
there
name,
is,
but yep,
yeah,
there's a real
yeah,
one.
right.
Um,
But that's where I would go down. I think it'd be a really fun character to have as a player character, or as at least as an
mhm.
NPC, who
Yeah,
provides an insight into Tzeentch, either as an enemy because they're part of that Tzeentchian cult, or as or is not, or as kind of an opponent to Tzeentch in that way, like a Cathayan kind of inquisitor, as it were.
right. So, Chris, great minds think alike, because you just reminded me that in the Beast in Velvet novel by Kim Newman, there actually is a character from Cathay who is a Tzeentch worshiper. A bit of a
Brilliant.
problematic character when you look
I'm
back at it,
sure.
but a bit too much kind of like Fu Manchu kind of thing
Oh
going on.
God, that'd be
Yep,
awful.
yep.
Yeah,
But it's it's a character that has existed and is a good idea, just for kind of showing that kind of universal intrusion of chaos into all these different societies. I think your idea of the sort of East Asian-esque character who is a inquisitor that can kind of root out Tzeentch is a good idea, because it could kind of depend on how you're going to represent Cathay in this world and what inspiration you're going to take. If you're using Taoism, sure, the kind of balance aspects can be very important, but if you choose to have a much more Confucian style, very static, structured society, then in that case, Tzeentch is actually going to be one of the great enemies for that society, since it's going to be so rebellious and kind of corrupting and doing various things in the shadows. Having a kind of inquisitorial character, we could probably come up with something better if we really writers
yeah.
roomed this. I think it
I was
actually
also
is a really neat concept.
going to go a bit further with that as well. Is that likely now? The other agents of chaos that we can think of, and likely are feeling the influence of Tzeentch through an aspect of chaos, is Clan Eshin, because they're
Mm,
classic
mm.
assassins. They learnt their trade, their skill in the Far East, and have the Under Empire there as well. So again, that is a way of introducing that kind of Tzeentchian influence, but through the guise of the Horned Rat.
Yeah, I like it. That's a really good idea.
Cool. 40k
Yeah,
then.
yeah. Let's do
or
it. Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to talk about two Chaos Space Marine things, because I couldn't find anything that I really liked amongst like not mortal, but like regular human Chaos cultists in 40k. But of course, I'm going to start off by talking about the Thousand Sons. This is one of the original Space Marine legions, which is led by Magnus the Red, and the Thousand Sons were known for their sorcerers and prophets, and of course, many of their forces during the Great Crusade were led by the Psyker sorcerers. But the story of the Thousand Sons is actually quite tragic. So Magnus and the upper echelons of the Legion knew about the dread foe of chaos. They saw it there in the warp, lurking. But they were actually chastised for even using their warp powers, and they were prevented from really embracing their more sorcerous nature. Now, during the Horus Heresy, Magnus attempted to warn the Emperor of the impending betrayal of Horus, but his psychic message caused a catastrophic damage to the Emperor's laboratory, since it was not prepared to take that kind of, sudden influx of psychic energy. In the confusion, the Emperor sent the Space Wolves Legion to basically rein in Thousand Sons, which they interpreted as kill them all. And in their darkest hour of defeat, as Magnus's back was literally broken by his brother, the chapter and Magnus himself offered themselves in service to Tzeentch. And from that, well, they changed. They grew in sorceress power. They were able to fight back, and through some other metaplot reasons, the Legion was eventually all turned into dust within their armor, which is pretty cool.
Isn't
Gives them
that
kind of a mummy feel.
isn't that because they were basically experiencing like terrible amounts of mutation,
Right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
Araman did the
The
what the
Rubicon?
no, not
Armin's
the
Rubicon?
Rubicon. It did something. He did. Let's see, Araman
Great
40k.
radio here.
Yeah, really great radio
Sorry
here.
about this.
What's it called? It's called the rubric of Araman,
Right.
and that basically prevents mutation but turn them all into dust. So again, it's pure hubris. Like, oh, I can fix it. Oh, I've messed it up actually.
Made it even worse. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really tragic actually, and represents perfectly Tzeentch's schemes, because the thing is that Magnus basically tried to warn the Emperor and travelled down the webway, and this is the webway that was being built by the Emperor through.
Correct. Yep.
And the entrance to this human part of the webway is the Golden Throne, and there's a reason why that exists there. Is because the only way to keep the gate, sealed and keep the demons out, because it's been ruined by Magnus, is the Emperor or someone else of great psychic potential has to sit on it. So, yeah, Magnus gets a really shit deal. You do have, and that's where that's tragic, and I think that's the point of Tzeentch. Tzeentch is quite tragic in the influence it causes many of the characters in Warhammer settings in general.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hey, can we just nerd out on Horus Heresy lore for a second here? So, the reason why the Emperor was trying to get into the webway was so that humanity would not need to rely on the warp anymore. Is that correct?
So
right, because they can travel through the webway.
So they didn't need to use warp engines for travel,
right?
Which is completely,
exactly.
Completely dangerous. Like, and that's why the Eldar use it. The Eldari use the webway for exactly the same reason.
Right.
And the webway is currently in current 40k setting completely, is even more fucked than usual. Thanks to the Great Rift. The Great Rift messed it up even more. So,
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll need to look into that. Interesting. All right. So, enough of that side tangent. Let's talk about one more Space Marine chapter, which is the Scourged. So, this Space Marine chapter was originally called the Seekers of Truth, and they were a Space Marine chapter working directly for the Inquisition. But their chapter master, Gallus Hereticus, began to doubt his work as the chapter continued to murder whom he thought were innocent people in blind faith to the Inquisitors. So he started to pray each night for the power to be able to tell if any man lied to him or told the truth, so that he would not have to execute those that were actually truly innocent. And Tzeentch heard this prayer and gifted his entire chapter with the power to hear every lie spoken by mankind. The Space Marine chapter quickly went mad, fled the Inquisition, and began realizing all the falsehoods that the Imperium had, all the falsehoods that was built on. So now they roam the galaxy with their battle cry of the lies, the lies, the lies.
Wow. That's also quite tragic in a sense, because as a Space Marine chapter, they would have been created in the era of the Imperial Creed, and the Imperial Creed, of course, is the faith of the Imperium that venerates the Emperor as a god, and the belief in that is what protects people's souls against the influence of chaos, which means the Scourged mostly feel betrayed, because the tragic thing is that gift they got given in a split second would have opened their eyes up to the fact that the truth is that the Emperor wanted humanity to follow the imperial truth, which is to remove all superstitions, remove the idea of gods, and as a way to elevate humanity. So it's sad that understanding the truth and the true goal, the true vision of the Emperor, by knowing that and knowing how the administratum has royally fucked that up for them, it drives them mad. It's tragic.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Very interesting chapter, and they really stood out amongst all the others. So that's why I wanted to share them. Um,
I
yeah, a lot of,
guess another Space Marine chapter, I say chapter, Legion, which has good influence. Mostly, our prime players for Chaos has to be the word bearers, right?
I mean, they certainly are the big boys for spreading the chaos faith, I guess you could say, and creating
Yeah,
cults and the like. Yeah, they'll definitely have many that are devoted to Tzeentch, but I don't really get the conspiratorial vibes from them,
no,
and not as much of the psyker usage as well in the way that the Thousand Sons have. Um, they really are. They do feel like chaos undivided most of the
yeah.
time. Um,
But I'm sure
yeah, I
there are
was thinking.
characters amongst them
Mhm.
that tend towards Tzeentch a little bit more than the others. I think that would be natural. So, like any of them are going to tend maybe one way or the other on any of the gods.
Right, right. And when you were mentioning with the scourge about the realization of the imperial truth and what it truly meant, um, that had me thinking, of course, of the Alpha Legion, who
Oh yeah,
are very mysterious in many ways. We don't really know if they truly worship chaos or if they are just playing some sort of a long game. The Legion novel in the Horus Heresy novel series, of course, hints at them making this sort of basically assisting Horus because they thought it would save the galaxy in the very end, which is kind of a interesting realization. Now, are they actually worshiping Tzeentch, or are they just pawns in one of Tzeentch's many complex uh, uh, plots, or are they almost competitors against Tzeentch with their own long-term plan? Could go any way.
interesting.
Actually, I
I'm
really
just
like
wondering.
that as Alpha Legion as competitors against Tzeentch. That is zesty right there.
Yeah.
Someone should write that novel.
I'm sure there's a whole list of there's a whole list of other chaos. There's like the wikis out there of other chaos traitor chapters and war bands, and the list is long. And how many are like Tzeentchian? I don't know. You've mentioned
Yeah, I
them.
mean, I looked it up. Most of them would just have like a sentence saying they worship Tzeentch, and that's really it. There's a lot of war bands out there for Chaos Space Marines, but most of them don't get that much detail. You basically
Yeah,
have the Chaos Legions from Horus Heresy, usually, and then usually like one or two like I don't want to say successor, but war bands that formed later on, which might be devoted to one of the different chaos gods.
yeah,
That's pretty much all we really get for them. Most of the focus goes on the legions because
yeah. There's
there's so
there's
many of them.
hardly anything written about most of these. They're just literally a throwaway name and which
Yeah,
invasion they were involved in or whatnot. Um, I mean, given all the theories of of the of the Thousand Sons, I guess I'm sure there's some interesting characters you can possibly amongst other chapters out there. Maybe the Blood Ravens. We don't know.
mm, right, right, yep.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Let's wrap up. So we've got role playing followers of Tzeentch. Oh God, this is.
Yeah. So I think the one thing I've written down here, which I think is very important to get across, is how to tackle that idea of like the conspiracies, the wheels within wheels for Zinch cults. Now, if you have NPCs and you're running the game, you're a storyteller, it's easy to kind of plot out what they're trying to do. But this is very challenging if you have a Zinchian player character. Maybe you're playing Black Crusade. Maybe you have, particularly insidious character in one of your soulbound games. So how are you going to get that across? Having that long term plot for them, because they should have something. There should be some sort of a conspiracy that they're either involved in or they're actively trying to achieve themselves. And for player characters, I would assign them or ask them to tell you in secret. Probably you don't want the rest of the players to know because it'd be kind of a cool surprise, but as a storyteller you should ask them to give you what their plot is and kind of the end goal for that plot. So that could be to let's go with 40k. Their plot is to uh, uh, install the Dark Mechanicum on Mars, for example. So basically, have chaos take over Mars in that Forge world, and you should ask them for one step in their plot that has already been achieved. Right, something has already been done, and that might be, let's say, smuggling a um, a junk code virus onto Mars. And then you should ask them for what the next step is, and this could be directly related to the previous one. Releasing that junk code onto or scrap code into the Mars computer or machine god systems, or it could be something kind of unrelated, which might be another layer to the onion. Perhaps. Well, let's just go with a classic assassination. They're going to assassinate a forge master somewhere on Mars to install one of their pawns. So having just those details of things that have happened before and things that need to happen in the future kind of gives that conspiracy some momentum, which I think is really important. Sometimes with player characters, they have an idea that they might want to do, but there's no real path to achieving it. And having that legwork done, especially working with the player, will just make the conspiracy a little bit more lively in your game.
I would also say, with any kind of trying to allow players to do conspiracies and so forth and I think this also comes from the fact that we've run, we're going to mention Vampire the Masquerade here and
Sure.
Vampire the Requiem, because those are classic games where conspiracies and plans within plans and plans that take many years to play out are common tropes. And I don't know, Mike, I highly suggest, if you've not watched it yet, to watch The Traitors, the US version. I've not watched the UK version yet. I've actually watched the US version first.
Oh,
I've
not
binge
familiar
watched
with
it.
it.
It's basically Werewolf, the social deduction game.
Ah,
It's
okay,
like that,
cool.
but over as a reality TV game show type thing. So I would watch that first of all if you're unsure how to let your players, and also let players get your players to watch it to inspire them to how conspiracies operate. Because, and this is as a GM running a game, you need to also at the same time think that some of your NPCs are going to be stupid. They're going to make mistakes. They are
Mm-hmm.
going to be far too fucking trusting for their own good. They're going to be or far too suspicious and jump to certain conclusions, etc. So if you are going to run a game with players who are, and this actually goes for whether they're Tzeentchian or not, actually, if you're playing a game of where it's very inquisitorial and there's a conspiracy and your inquisitorial retinue are also essentially engaging in a undercover conspiracy, you have to allow your NPCs to be stupid because they're not they're not you, the GM. You are trying to create opportunities of drama and opportunities for your players to succeed. And if you allow them opportunity to succeed, you're allowing also an opportunity for your players to overreach. And that's the aim, I think, with running a conspiracy. You've got to create openings for players to overreach, and that can only be done with allowing first characters to be stupid.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and definitely overreach and exposure. Exposure really is going to
Yeah.
be the big thing. Yeah, you see that in like Demon of Descent, for example. That can be pretty critical to that game as well. Cool. Are those our tips for followers of Tzeentch? I would also harken back to the idea to look at Warcry and Age of Sigmar for a lot of ideas. Especially for actually, I was saying Woofrep would benefit from that. Man, 40k grabbing some of those different cults would be really interesting on feral worlds or more
Yeah.
primitive societies, medieval worlds and the like. So that is another great way to just mine for ideas.
Right. Well, I guess we quickly wrap up the last bits here. So demons, because there's a lot of cool demons out there for Tzeentch.
Yeah.
Horrors. They're just fun, aren't they? They're just kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, cheerful, madly babbling creatures. They're constantly sort of shifting and the like. And the fun trick, which I mean, really only surprises you the first time, is that if a pink horror is defeated, it will split into two blue horrors. They have kind of weird sucker fingers, which are really kind of gruesome, and they're not really easy to interact with. That's actually one of the strange things about the Tzeentchian demons is that they aren't like sinister demons who are going to, kind of lure you into um, some sort of a bad deal or something like that. Most of them are actually very kind of primitive and destructive, um, but also a bit interesting as well.
Um,
Moving on from the blue horrors and the pink horrors, there's of
oh,
course the
I was going to say blue horrors also split into brimstone horrors as well. They're
oh yeah,
slightly
that's right.
smaller and even more jolly.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, those you can actually get the miniatures of that for in
Yeah.
a Silver Tower. Yep. Um, and then of course we have the flamers. These are kind of these sort of bird-like flying giant flamethrower monsters. That's really the only way to describe them. Um, Not very talkative either. Really just kind of created for the wargaming side of things, where they are massively, massively destructive. There's also the Screamers of Tzeentch and the Disc of Tzeentch. The
Yeah.
Screamers are these giant manta ray demons which fly across the battlefield, kind of slicing people up, but they can be tamed by one of the sorcerers of Tzeentch to become a disc, which levitates and allows them to kind of fly quickly across the battlefield. And summoning one is seen as a status symbol amongst sorcerers because it's so difficult. And then we finally get to the Lord of Change. This is a giant bird sorcerer, massively strong, hyper intelligent, incredibly powerful psyker or sorcerer, spellcaster. Um, and these are the demons that characters could actually talk to, for example, or that NPCs might actually be doing negotiations with, if not talking to Tzeentch directly or through some sort of proxy. Um, I do want to highlight that there is a Black Library novel called Pawns of Chaos, which I don't really recommend reading because there's some problematic stuff in it. But at the end, there is some really cool stuff where a human sacrifice is basically slowly being transformed into a Lord of Change and starts to kind of like see the universe for how it truly is and kind of begins to recognize the human begins to recognize the plans of Tzeentch and how that chaos god kind of has his fingers in everything, which is pretty
Interesting.
neat. Pretty neat.
I'm just looking on the products page for Games Workshop. So there's also some other things related to other Tzeentchian demons and things. There's the blue
Yeah,
scribes, which are like character kind of horrors who are doing magic floating on a disc or a
yep.
screamer. There's the change caster, which looks like, I guess, a mortal has been kind of exalted and mixed with a horror because they've got also a moon face, which is weird. I've got one of these miniatures. They're really cool. The Ogroid Thaumaturge. So they're Ogroids in Age of Sigmar. So a Thaumaturge is just one that's obviously been tempted to worship Tzeentch in particular. There's also everything to do with Kharak acolytes. Again, that's basically the main bulk, big body of mortal worshippers of Tzeentch in Age of Sigmar, and
Mhm.
Zangors, which I freaking love. I love the miniatures for. They're
Yeah,
just beastmen aligned more closely to Tzeentch, much
yeah.
like you get
The bird beastman,
Pestigors. Yeah, Pestigors are
bird
cool as
beastman. Yeah.
well. Yeah, those are all the cool stuff that is out there. And then back to the Black Library thing, I was going to quickly say a book that can be picked up is, which I've read. I don't read loads of Black Library. I really need to sort out my reading when I'm not writing loads and everything else. So in The Wicked and the Damned, which is a collection of 3 horror stories, There is one which involves a space marine found on a space hulk, and spoiler alerts, totally worshipping Tzeentch, and it goes completely crazy for the people that are employed to tear apart this old spaceship to reuse it for parts for the Imperium. Yeah, like it's just crazy, like full on what you expect from Tzeentch.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Good recommendations. And let's go with the double bonus round for this episode because we didn't have too much of the Black Library this time. And let's talk about some Tzeentchian locations because he's got a bit more than some of the other Chaos Gods. Starting things off, we have the Silver Tower of Tzeentch, and this is slightly different in each of the games. In 40k, the Silver Towers are actually remnants of Prospero, the Thousand Suns destroyed homeworld, and these towers kind of roam across the battlefield. Sometimes they have sorcerers inside of them. Sometimes they can kind of focus mirrors, crystals, and other energy to create destruction upon a battlefield. But there are these towers which are constantly shifting, growing, and changing. And of course, yes, levitating across the battlefield. In Age of Sigmar, however, the Silver Tower is more of a static location, not static location, but a singular location, which is the dungeon setting for the first Warhammer Quest game.
That's not quite true. There's actually
Not
quite a
quite
few
true.
silver.
There's
No,
multiple.
there's multiple because one
Oh, I'm sorry.
crashes in the realm of metal, and it crashes near some realm gates and is basically part of Bellacor's like huge plan, which unleashes this storm of chaos event,
Wait
which
a
is
minute.
what prevents the Stormcast Eternals. You know, when they die, they get taken
Yeah.
back to the realm of heavens. Yeah, that process gets prevented, and that's why we've got the new Stormcast type, because they are able, when they die, when they get, first of all, that when they get sent from the realm of heavens, they come down as a lightning bolt that can pierce that storm, but also when they
Mm-hmm.
die and explode, they can also be taken back through that storm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. But so, Chris, you're telling me that Bellacor's great plan for Age of Sigmar begins with him taking something from the heavens and then throwing it down onto the realms below and wrecking a city.
Yeah, I
Sounds
think
familiar. Where have I
yeah,
heard that before?
I know, right? I think it happens near. I can't remember which city it is, but yeah, it's completely bonkers.
No, I like it. I like it. It's cool. And it's a good callback to Mordheim as well. Um, all right, so that's the Silver Tower. We also have the Crystal Labyrinth, which is a maze of Tzeentch's creation, which has these ever changing avenues, basically, and has multiple gates which you have to kind of solve to even enter this place. And the Crystal Labyrinth is home to Tzeentch's throne and the Impossible Fortress, and his nearly limitless knowledge in the hidden library. And of course, this place is filled with those who have become lost within it or failed the inhabitants' riddles. So,
Yeah.
a lot of lost souls walking the streets.
And then another setting is Brightspear, which is a city that was created for the Age of Sigmar RPG. That's in the realm of Akshai, which you normally associate with Khorne. But Brightspear seems to have I've not really read too much about it, but seems to have kind of a heavy Tzeentchian cult presence there. So again, that's something to look into. I was just also, I'm going to finish off. This is the last thing I'm going to finish off right on. You know how we were talking about Tzeentchian cults and other Marines? There's a
Yeah.
war band of Black Legion Space Marines called the Sons of Cyclops, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
are named after the Primarch, Magnus the Red. So they're actually Black Legion, but they're Tzeentchian aligned, and I don't quite understand, and I'm sure anyone that's maybe read the book that they appear in. Let me just see: Black Legion Codex, Black Crusade, Codex Space Marines 8th edition. Okay, and Warzone Nachmund cites them. Okay, good. That's all recent books. Anyway, So they're Black Legion, they're Marines, but they're also rubric Marines. So somehow they, by veneration of Tzeentch and something, somewhere along the lines, they have undergone the same transition that the Thousand Sons have.
Well, that's a bit of a mystery right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at this. It doesn't seem to explain how that happened. Interesting.
No.
Interesting. Yeah. Their shoulder pad is a combination of Thousand Sun symbol and the Eye of Horus. Huh.
That's kind of cool. I
Yeah.
you know, it's nice to have more options that aren't just your standard. Oh, you want to play Tzeentch and Marines? They're all, they're all Thousand Suns. Like that's that's boring. I like the idea that there's some variety out there. Um, Black Legion with a bit with apparently a splash of blue in their color scheme. That's kind of cool. So, yeah, I mean that's just kind of fun. I think that wraps us up.
Yep. That's all I got.
Yeah. And we are in the process of preparing a new series as well, which will focus on the Iron Kingdoms RPG. So, another big war game out there and setting, which I've worked on. So I'm literally seeing what we're going to be having as our logo for it and everything else. So there's lots of cool stuff going on. It's just nice to finally get around to recording again in so long.
Definitely.
I think this has energized us to get back into it. There's a lot of good stuff going on. That's pretty much, I think, it for this episode. So we'll be back with Slaanesh, and then we're going to have to talk about Darktide, and maybe have a little bit of a chat about what the hell is clearly, what teasers are out there, what we're expecting from a certain Henry Cavill, because the world of Warhammer media is about to explode.
All right, I'll give Henry I'll give him a call.
If I could get him to play some Wrath and Glory, I would love it. Also, the other thing I will give, all things going to plan, I will be at Warhammer Fest in Manchester at the end of April.
Sweet.
So it'll be good to meet listeners there. So that's basically it.
Yep, we are Dark Days Radio. You can check out more of our episodes at darker-days.org. We have a link tree, which will be in the show notes, which has all of our social media. You can find, a link to our Discord, Facebook, and everything else. That's a good thing to check out. We have a lot of content coming up real soon. Crystal is actually recording another mentorship episode for getting into the gaming industry. So that'd be really cool, and another great thing to look forward to.
Cool. So thank you for listening. Thank you again, Mike, for helping me with this, because I am slightly under the weather. And we'll talk to you all soon at a later date about Slaanesh. So bye for now.
Bye.